Well, it's Tech Talk again. Today, we'll be talking about bass. I remember Peter Lingdorf telling me once, you never can't have enough bass. But there's some truth to it, Roland, because how much bass extension do we really need to reproduce an instrument faithfully, truthfully?
Yeah, that's a really good question because we all know that low frequencies, bass, that's the foundation of music. It gives the body, and many instruments reach down, not only a double bass or E-bass, but also many instruments like a piano or even a voice that has this fullness, this nice full sound. And of course, everything with dance music and so on, and movies, right?
Yeah.
But there's one thing more. It's not only about instruments playing bass where we need this bass extension. It's even that low frequencies, especially when you record it and reproduce it, that gives you a lot of information, hidden information about the room size, about the room dimensions. I did an experiment some years ago in a demo, actually, where I took a recording of Carnegie Hall. And I only took the intro sequence where there was applause before the music started. And when you remove the low frequencies below 80 hertz or something, and you really filter them out, the whole Carnegie Hall shrinked, and there was a smaller audience. And when you remove the filter and have the low frequency extend, then the room size was there again, and it was a believable big hall. Now, how can that be? Because applause, hand clapping, has no bass, no low frequencies at all, nothing. But in this big hall, in any big hall, the low frequencies really, they give this information. They are there because of the reverb in the room, and that's recorded. So if you remove it, it's gone, and you don't. Our hearing, our mind doesn't have this information about the room size anymore. So there's more than just low frequencies needed to reproduce instruments. It's a lot about information in depth, in size, and that is important as well. So that's quite interesting, and that's why we need loudspeakers that are really extend down to the low frequencies from the music point of view.
Is there a difference between a stereo setup or a home cinema setup in terms of bass extension?
In a home cinema, it's even one more step important because there's this LFE channel, the low frequency effects channels, and that's an additional channel. So in a cinema, every speaker carries bass. So the LFE is not the bass channel. LFE is low frequency effects. It's an extra channel where some sound effects are mixed on. And then, of course, it makes a lot of sense to reproduce that channel. So it's double important. But every recording, every music recording, you have to have low frequency extension, because the more you filter it out or the more you roll it off, you really lose that feeling of depth and soundstage, and not only miss the lowest note, you miss much more.
So if one would listen to, for instance, a bookshelf on a stand, and you play some real nice piano music, you would miss out.
You would miss out, but you would not really miss out the lowest notes, because you could see how often does the pianist play the lowest notes. That's very rare in most recordings. So you could look at a frequency response or technical specs of a bookshelf speaker and say, oh, that goes down to 55 hertz. That's fine. I mean, what happens at 30 hertz, at 40 hertz? Almost nothing. Best actually dance music or church organ or something like that. But it's always worth to look at the small print, because if a speaker extends down to 55 hertz, in 99% of our cases, look at the small print and you find it's 55 hertz minus 3 dB or minus 6 dB. And what that means is that the speaker at 55 hertz already doesn't perform as good as at 70, 80, 90 hertz. It actually started earlier to roll off. That's what this minus 3 or minus 6 dB tells you.
Yeah.
So it's not really an accurate number. Well, it is an accurate number in measurement terms, but it doesn't represent how the speaker really sounds like, because it started earlier to roll off. So when you see a number like minus 3, minus 6, what it actually says in this example, that the roll-off starts probably already around 65 hertz. And even that is usually with a little help of a friend called the bass reflex port, which, rounds this low frequency performance up and smoothens this out or extends it a little bit, which actually means that the actual woofer is already on its edge of performance around this 60, 65 hertz, and maybe then help with the bass reflex port. And that in turn means that it's already not sounding as ideal as it should, or as the music was recorded. So now we're moving up in the frequency, and even if we move up in the frequency, it still is not as good. So you have a slightly weaker performance. And then what you do, you turn up the volume, but the woofer is on its edge, so it cannot do anymore. So it sounds even weaker, and you stress the woofer even more.
Yeah.
So you might think this first number that you see, that would be all right, but really look closely at what that means and understand what that means, and never use the speaker on its edge. So I would always try the best, or see how far you can stretch your budget to really have a full range speaker, to go down to 40, 30 hertz, even if you can afford it, because that means that everything that happens above that frequency is reproduced in the very best way, effortless, and not just, it just makes it to 40 hertz. No. That's already the limit. So have that corner frequency, as it's called, as much down as possible.
Yeah. Recapping your little applause anecdote. So again, with the bookshelf dropping down to 60, 55 hertz, won't you be missing out then the venue information?
Absolutely, yeah. It's just gone. It's not there.
Yeah.
And you think you're not missing that because you don't play the low frequencies, but they are there, and they are discreetly filtered out, not actively filtered out, but not reproduced. And that's why these speakers sound smaller. You don't hear the recorded venue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but mind that we have speakers with potent bass reproduction with one big woofer, so it's really reaching down to where we want it to be. Would there be any benefit of doubling up or tripling up or quadrupling? Let me state it in another way. You have bass reach and you have bass output. So we need to be in a comfortable zone in terms of bass reach, but would mounting up the bass output make any difference in the experience?
It's a good question, because the bass shouldn't get louder. I mean, if you have, let's stay in the stereo domain for now. If you add more subwoofers, or 2.2 subwoofers instead of only one, which is highly recommended, it's not so much about that you get more bass, because having 2 subwoofers or 3 or 4 should not always make the bass louder. That would be wrong, because the amount of bass is in the recording, and not by adding more subwoofers. So you extend the low frequency, but at one point it's not about more bass, it's about better bass, and more
extending headroom,
headroom, and having more effortless bass.
Yeah.
And then also, if you extend the low frequency reach, you also will hear more details in the bass, because the woofer has an easier time to reproduce the low frequencies, and that helps in the frequencies further up, higher up. So you hear more texture in the bass. You hear the bass string, and you hear the vibration of the string. You hear more details. So it's more bass, better bass, more subwoofers. Is not always about having more bass in the room or having louder bass. It is about bass quality. And that is also what, if we move to home cinema, for example, of course, we all love bass, and the more the better. But at one point, it's not about even more bass, it's about better bass and having better impulse response, better punch, and more details in the bass.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of detail. There are so many music recordings played on speaker that is not good enough in the bass, all these bass notes kind of merge into one. So it's not really a one-note bass, but they are all a little bit blurred. So it's full and it's fine, but there's no texture, there's no difference. It's hard to follow the bass melody. And the better the bass is, the more you really hear the details and follow the whole melody and hear the strings or whatever bass details you have.
Yeah. So how can we recognize that our system is reproducing a truthful bass extension, that the bass is good, is okay?
That is only compare something that is better. It's by comparison, because you never know what you're missing. So it's a little bit hard. Sometimes it helps to listen with good headphones, because then the room is out of the equation and you hear much more. If the headphone is good enough, you hear more about the actual recording, and then you hear, the bass actually has some details, and I can hear how they played the bass, or how they played the drum, or how the explosion really sounds like. So headphones always help to get closer to how the bass really should sound like. And then it's easier to try to have the same experience from the pair of speaker in the room, either by upgrading the speaker, or by finding a better spot for the speaker, or by, with a little help of room correction in the room, to clean up the bass, not to lose the bass, but to clean up the bass and hear more into the recording.
Yeah. Let's get very concrete now. Let's compare two Steinway Lingdorf speakers. If you take Model A, it has like two big woofers. If you compare that with Model B, it has a lot more woofers. Why is that? And is there then a difference in the character of the speaker, in the sound balance?
Sound balance, not so much. I mean, not every two speakers doesn't sound alike, never. But it's not so much a sound balance. First of all, one speaker is a closed speaker, supposed to be against the wall, and the other is an open dipole. And with an open dipole, you also have some canceling out effects, and you have to kind of even that out again. So you need more woofer surface to shift air.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that you really have, the more woofers you have, and it might even look like an overdose of woofers. But it's not, because the more woofers you have, the more speakers can shift air, the more effortless each driver can work. And more effortless means it's easier to reproduce all the details and not just shift the air. You can also have a small cone, moving in and out like crazy and moving that same amount of air, but it will not be good at reproducing all the smaller details. So having more woofer or cone surface has two benefits. One is you shift more air, and that gives you lower bass reach and more volume. But also the bass quality improves because you hear more details.
So did we just arrive at the basis of the advice from Lingdorf and Steinway Lingdorf to always use a 2+2 configuration?
Yeah, that is, we always go for 2+2 because the interaction from the subwoofers with the main speakers is just better. I know there's for many, many years, this 2.1 idea is around. And that is the idea that bass can be mono because you cannot locate it easily. And that's true for very low frequencies. But never forget that the subwoofer is not a thing on its own. The subwoofer has to interact with the main speakers, no matter whether it's in a stereo setup or in the home cinema. A subwoofer is not one thing. A subwoofer has to acoustically match at least two other speakers. And that other speaker is left and right. It's stereo.
Yep.
And there's not a brick wall filter. It's not like, okay, the mono bass, the frequencies you cannot locate are placed on the woofer and every other frequency is played on the main speaker or on the front speaker, on the full range speaker. No, there is no exact filter. You have some frequencies which are played on both. And it's very, very beneficial to have a seamless integration between the subwoofer and the speaker, the front speaker. And that's much easier. This integration is much easier if you retain the stereo information and have a left and a right woofer, so that the left woofer integrates with the left speaker and the right woofer integrates better with the right speaker. So you retain the stereo information. It's still true that 20, 30, 40 hertz you cannot localize, but that's not where the woofer ends. They have to play together as one. That's the ultimate goal from a good subwoofer, that it completely integrates and you cannot locate it. And with a 0.1 system, with one mono subwoofer, you can, most of the time, you can point at that woofer with closed eyes.
Yeah.
Try it. You just close your eyes, play some very, very low frequency. You can say, there it is.
Mm-hmm. So that was a 2.1 or 2.2 situation for stereo use mainly. But how is that in cinema?
It's even more critical because in a cinema, many people think that you have the subwoofer 0.1, for example, just put it somewhere in the corner because it only plays the LFE.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be really big. It's a LFE, it stands in the corner and it rumbles along. But that's not really giving you good bass performance because, as mentioned, the LFE is low frequency effects. It's an additional channel on top of all the other speakers. And if you look at how movie soundtracks, sound effects are created in the studio, all speakers carry bass. The front speakers, even the surround speakers, can carry bass down to 20 hertz. The LFE is just on top of that. It's effects, bass effects, low frequency effects. So in most cinemas, and we very often see that if you see measurements from, let's say, MP40, MP60 from some customer, and then they have questions about Room Perfect and about the setup, and we look at the measurements, very often the subwoofer is undersized. Very often that's the bottleneck. You would think a subwoofer is always the strongest part of the link because it's a subwoofer, it plays the bass, and it's great to have an LFE. No, we really see very often that it's the weakest link in the whole chain because that subwoofer has to play the LFE channel. And if you don't have full range speakers in front and center and surrounds, and most people don't, where does this bass information from the front and surround speakers go? Either it disappears in the black hole, or it's redirected
to the LFE,
to the subwoofer. So now the subwoofer has to play lots of information. It has to play the LFE channel, and it has to play 5 times or 7 times or 9 times, depending on your surround setup, bass information, bass energy from the other speakers. Maybe you are lucky you invested in big floor stand speakers left and right, but already the center is mixed at the same way in the studio, almost like a full range speaker. So that's where it ends. And then you have the surround speakers. Even the Atmos speakers, by the way, in theory, studios can use it down to 40 hertz. So, and if they're not capable of playing that, it's redirected to the subwoofer. So it's in most systems, the subwoofer is really overloaded with too many bass and too many sound energy. And now here comes the actual problem. During the calibration, no matter which calibration system you use, the algorithm tries to understand what's the limit of the system here. And if the subwoofer is a limit, like, it cannot play any louder, so we cannot direct all the bass, so let's limit the whole sound performance. Let's kill some headroom because the subwoofer is the bottleneck. It costs a lot of sound performance overall. It's not only that the woofer cannot perform it's good anymore. It really holds down the whole system. And that's why it makes a lot of sense to take all your budget or wait a month or two and really upscale the subwoofer. It's not for louder bass. It's a little bit about more bass, but it's about better bass and get better performance from all speakers because the subwoofer has to carry a lot.
So a little more about bass in home cinema. You said that front speakers can go down to as low as 20 hertz, even Atmos speakers down to 40 hertz. But let's take a closer look at the LFE. It can generate low frequency effects from down to whatever it's audible until 120 hertz.
Exactly. Yeah.
But for that you need a very capable subwoofer. Are there any out there?
And many are not. I mean, you can even see the frequency response of subwoofers either from the manufacturer or from some reviews. And it's true, the LFE channel carries below 20 hertz up to 120 hertz, and that's quite wide bandwidth. And you see then this. On the other hand, you see this frequency response of many subwoofers around 80 hertz, like a peak almost.
Yeah.
So they're really good around 80 hertz, but they're not really good further down, and they're not really good further up the frequency. And that means that the integration to the front speakers is not good if you have this peaky frequency response. So I would always do the best to find out what the actual frequency response of the subwoofer is and have it as wide as possible. So reach as low as possible. That's of course also down to size and sometimes also down to budget. But equally important is that it reaches high enough so it can have a seamless integration to the front speakers and not have these one note 80 hertz subwoofer. They are out there, but luckily you can see the measurements.
Yeah, but if you don't have that data, how can you recognize that the subwoofer is potent to fulfill the bandwidth that is needed? Trust your ears?
No, in the low frequencies it's not so easy. You can hardly listen to let's say a rumble note from 40 hertz to 100 hertz and then compare it. You will not hear whether it's missing or not missing. So unfortunately, that's down to accurate measurements, either issued by the manufacturer or you find it in a review or something.
So we end up where we began with Peter's words. You can't really have enough bass.
That's true. That's true. Yes.
So when you're doing a stereo setup or a home cinema setup, mind the bass and pay attention to it. And yeah, try to stretch the budget to provide
it's worth it.
the right bass output. That's it for this Tech Talk. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.